Uh, so hello everyone. I'm Enrique of the Aitor team. Today we are going to talk about the WYSIWYG Aitor architecture that we are proposing for the not only the study-side Aitor product, but actually providing a WYSIWYG 18 experience across several features in GitLab. Um, so first of all, the what I want to talk about or share with you today is not only talking about the WYSIWYG editor itself, but actually sharing the story of the static site editor team, why we implemented WYSIWYG editor in the product, and what challenges we faced so far over time. And what we are trying to solve with this new re-architecture proposal. I think this is um, the best way of developing empathy with the problems that we are trying to solve. Um, so yes, and if you have any question, please feel free to interrupt me. Probably I won't be able to solve to answer some of them. These are kind of complicated topic, but this is the beginning of the conversation. So if we can just take note of those questions and talk about it in an issue, it could be great. Um, so I prepared some slides because it's probably easy with some visual aids to explain this topic. So I'm gonna share my screen. So I'm gonna share my entire desktop. I'm gonna remove this annoying toolbar from here. Where should I put it? Well, I'm gonna put it there. So I think that the best way of starting to talk about the WYSIWYG editor is exploring for a moment the product where the editor is used, that is the study site editor. So I'm gonna take a couple of minutes to give it a quick try and see how it works and how we are using the WYSIWYG editor in there. So this is the team page of the extinct study site editor team that no longer exists, but I'm gonna use it as a way of testing the study site editor. So I'm gonna open it here in the opening this link, and we're gonna load the page. So the idea of the study site editor, as Eric explained yesterday, is that to make more friendly the process of editing a web page of a static site of a static site generator. Static site generators use Markdown as the data format to create content in a website. So Markdown is a language that is definitely easier for formatting rich text than alternatives like HTML. But there is still a learning curve that is usually very difficult for non-technical users. So the idea of the WYSIWYG editor is to first to present the markdown as the user would see it in the web page, and allowing to edit it in a WYSIWYG style. What you see is what you get. So this is the WYSIWYG editor. All this block here, and we are using a library. Well, I would say that a library is the best way of calling it, called TOSUI. The idea is that you can make any change, let's say removing a dot. Every page in a static site generator has metadata to specify the title of the page or the layout, and you can go here and edit that metadata. That's usually specified in the source file as a front matter. And then you can submit the changes from right from here, like creating the size editor will create the commit, the branch, and a merge request for you, and you can add the merge request information here. So what Toast UI provides for us? So let's explore it a bit. We have two tabs here. The first one is a WYSIWYG mode. The second one is a Markdown mode. Basically, the first tab is the actual WYSIWYG editor that is rendering the Markdown and allowing the user to edit the rendered version of the source. And then the second tab is the raw Markdown source. So this tab here is more of a source code editor, and this tab here is the WYSIWYG. And then Toast UI provides some tools for formatting text and init content that will work on both sides. So next, what I want to do is exploring a little bit more what is the architecture and all of the components that that conform Toast UI. So I'm gonna go to these slides that I prepared to explain this, and I'm going to in present mode. Can you see the slides so far?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool, thank you. So I want to explain briefly what a WYSIWYG editor is. So the difference between, and the purpose of this is to understand the difference between a text editor and a WYSIWYG editor. In a text editor, you load the source, you load a file, a text file, and you edit the content of that text file directly. In the case of the WYSIWYG editor, there is a more complex process going on. First, we render the source file. In the case of Markdown, the usual rendering target is HTML. Perhaps there is other targets. And then there is an editor that displays that render content and allows the user to edit it. And after that, after the user has made all of the changes that they want, that render content is transformed back to the source format. So in the case of and the WYSIWYG editor provides an API to get that transformed source. That it would be the last step here. So how does Toast UI translates that process? Basically, Toast UI has 5 components to make that, to make everything work. Let's start from the high level one, that is the Toast UI API. And the idea of this is that if you remember in the demo that I did, Toast UI has like a toolbar that allows setting text as bold and things like that. So the high level API is all of those visual components and a public API to set the content and get the content. And then Toast UI uses 2 editors for the Markdown and the WYSIWYG mode. On one side, in the Markdown mode, is a code mirror dependency. Code mirror is a text editor that is focused on editing source code. Probably very similar to Monaco. It is like they are very, very equivalent. So the process of editing content in the Markdown mode in Toast UI is very simple. There is no transformation. It is just a code editor. So the other part is displaying is a WYSIWYG mode, and Toast UI uses another component that is called Esquire. By the way, here in my speaker notes, if you open the presentation, you will see that I have links for everything all of the components that I'm making references here. So you can go on and explore them. But Squire is a rich text editor that is based in content editable. That is a native web technology. And what ToastUI does is implementing a markdown parser that transforms the markdown source to HTML. It loads that HTML in Squire, and then it provides a markdown serializer that transforms the HTML that the user modified in Squire back to markdown.
Enrique, let me argue something. So we are not calling the preview markdown endpoint that we have at the moment in our API.
No, we are not.
So that means that we cannot include GFM reference in that markdown, right?
That's
so
right.
This is okay. Thanks.
So far, the only markdown that we can support in using ToastUI is a markdown that ToastUI supports. So extensions like the GitLab markdown extensions like mentions and things like that do not work in ToastUI, and we will have to implement them.
But that kind of makes sense that it doesn't work because the use case is different. Like, because this is for a specific project that's going to probably be deployed to another site or something. We're not leaving comments that it would even live in the GitLab instance. This is probably going to live outside the GitLab instance.
That is completely right. So there are many flavors of Markdown, and there are many scenarios where we use it. For example, in the case of you mentioned, Paul, ToastUI wasn't created to be used within the issue description editor or to be embedded in the comment section. So they don't need to implement support for any of those features. In the same way, in the static site editor, there are many. We're building an editor for pages of a static site generator. Those pages usually have some templating syntax that we have to support, and ToastUI doesn't support that because they don't have to. That's not their use case.
Got it. But also to add another point, and to also what Fran was saying, I think we have an issue too for this, but users have wanted WYSIWYG comments editing, WYSIWYG description editing in GitLab for a while too. So it is good to know that what's happening here would be really hard to reuse for that use case. That's interesting. Okay, sorry.
No, thanks for your contribution. So far, let's keep exploring a little bit more why we are replacing ToastUI. As you saw in the demo, it can edit Markdown, right? And that's exactly what we wanted in the site editor. But the main problem that we have right now is that ToastUI is not flexible. None of the components that I talk about in this diagram are extensible. We cannot extend the Markdown parser to support things like GFM or support other extensions of Markdown. We cannot extend the Markdown serializer. We cannot extend the WYSIWYG editor, Squire, to support syntax that we require in the fixtures in several fixtures across GitLab. So, for example, in the case of a static site editor, we have 3 use cases that we have to support for supporting editing pages for the middleman static site generator. In the first place, a common case in the handbook is that we have to render partials that are embedded in the handbook pages. For example, a common case is rendering the team YAML file that is like a database for all of the people working in GitLab. Another use case is explaining and editing front matter, the metadata that I showed before. And the other use case is having attributes or metadata to markdown elements, and those are attribute definitions. So as we support more static site generators, we will come up with use cases that require supporting custom syntax within Markdown documents that are not exactly Markdown sometimes. And in the same as we were talking previously, we have use cases in the issue description or the wiki where we have a special syntax for those use cases, and we need enough flexibility to support all of them. So we cannot extend the Markdown parser. We cannot either extend the editor capabilities. One of the features that we've always wanted to implement in the static-site editor is block editing style, a la Medium or Notion. And we cannot implement it because we cannot extend Squire. We cannot load content dynamically, and we cannot implement features like Markdown autocomplete. Finally, the third reason is there are many bugs that we cannot fix either. For example, one of the problems of those UI is that it is translating HTML back to Markdown. And that's a very buggy process because HTML is a very flexible way of structuring content. And there are many use cases that are causing problems. So those are basically the reasons for that, that we decided to start evaluating and investigating other options. By the way, there is in the presentation there are some notes where I left reference to issues where we explain more of those problems. Okay, so we understood that we needed a more flexible platform, one that we could have more control over it. So we decided to investigate and define what were the requirements to choose the best platform that could suit our needs. So what are we looking in this new platform? First, we need a parser, a Markdown parser that is extensible. So we can implement custom tokenizers and support and add new nodes to the abstract syntax tree. And in the same way, we also need to be able to extend the WYSIWYG editor. For example, to give even some extra examples of what it means extending the editor. Let's say that we have a mermaid diagram in a Markdown page. So we want to implement an editor for those mermaid diagrams. We cannot do that with those UI, and we want to be able to support advanced use cases like that. Oh, this was slow. We want modularity and asynchronous loading. So we want to be able to say that if we are supporting Markdown syntax that is only required by the issue description page, we don't want to load that module in the static-site editor. So we want to be able to implement all of those modules as independent entities and loading them asynchronously. The other two requirements are more about the community and who is maintaining the project. So we want something that is well financed, that is a mature, well-tested platform that has an active open source community. There are more requirements, and I think that it is worth jumping to the issue here. Because we actually created a requirements table that has a very long evaluation criteria that is not limited to the points that I made, but those are probably the most important ones. So if you want to actually read a little bit more about it, about the UX requirements and the technical ones, I recommend you to go to this issue and read about it. So let's jump here. Okay, so we have a good evaluation criteria table. And after a lot of investigation, we ended up about the different WYSIWYG platforms that are available out there. We ended up with two options. The first one is CK8 or 5 Mark as a markdown parser. And the other one is Prose Mirror and TipTap plus markdown it as the alternative markdown parser. We did a lot of investigation of those two editors, and we also implemented some proof of concepts to evaluate many aspects of both alternatives. Again, there are some links in there where you can see the results of that investigation. But after a while, we determined that Prose Mirror plus TipTap and markdown it, not mark, is a best option. And why? Well, first, that alternative has a smaller bundle size footprint than CK8. It is easier to integrate with pajamas because Prose Mirror and TipTap does not provide a visual user interface. They provide a series of renderless components that we have to provide the styles. That also influences the bundle size because instead of having to include a lot more CSS, a lot more JavaScript, we're just going to use GitLab UI components and utility classes to define those visual components. Prose Mirror API is way friendlier than CK8. We can also implement editor extensions using Vue. That Vue integration comes actually from TipTap, not Prose Mirror. Okay, so we have a new platform. We chose a new platform, and now we have to define what are our goals with the new architecture and what we want to achieve. So first of all, we don't want to create an editor that fits all of the use cases in GitLab. At first, when we were thinking about implementing the WYSIWYG editor, we were limiting the scope of to the requirements of the study site editor. But actually, as Paul mentioned before, this is a long requested feature, having a WYSIWYG editing experience across features in GitLab. And in fact, there are people that have tried and attempted to do that before. So we decided to broaden the scope of our ambition. And what we want to do is, instead of creating an editor that fits all of the use cases, we want to provide a toolkit. This toolkit will have basic support for Common Mark and GFM. That's the common requirement, the common use case across all of the editors in GitLab. All of them support Common Mark. That is a specification that tries to, to be like the default of the standard specification for Markdown. And all of them support GFM. Actually, this is not GitLab formatted Markdown. This is GitHub formatted Markdown. Features like tables and strike-through, all of them are supported by editors in GitLab. So we want to provide all of that by default. And then it has to be fully extensible and modular. So let's expand a little bit more on that. So this architecture is very similar to what ProseUI provide. We have a parser that allows rendering the markdown into a format that Prose Mirror understands. And then after making some edits in the document, we convert back the Prose Mirror document to a markdown source. So what is the difference with ProseUI? So each of these components, we will be able to extend them. So if we want, for example, to extend the parsers to support a new syntax, we can do it. If we want to provide a new way of visualizing a table, of editing a table in a picture, we can do it. And we can also customize the way that a markdown is serialized. So this could be like the way that the editor toolkit would relate to the specific features on GitLab. If in the case of the wiki, some of the custom Markdown syntax that they support is a way of making direct page links, hierarchical link extensions. So what we want is like when you are using the editor toolkit in the wiki, you will have the basics of supporting the common Markdown functionality. But if you want to implement these features, you have to implement them within the wiki. So we have that separation of concerns, and each feature is implementing support for what exactly they need. So yeah, that's basically the architecture. I know that probably I left out many things. This is like a very complex topic, and it's difficult to fit everything in a group of slides. But if you have any questions, I would love to
ask you a
help
question?
answering them.
Can you go back to the slide where you had the thing going to prose mirror? It was a couple of slides back. Is this this slide just immediately back? It was the architecture slide thing.
Here.
So my question is, so looking at the original architecture and some of the problems with that, one of the problems identified was that there's not extensibility here. So we can't do a CMS markup or any other kind of extending on that syntax. But here, what I'm curious about, so this is serializing to a middle layer that we could then like be able to serialize to HTML or back to Markdown by extending this prose mirror. But my question is this still happening where we take the whole Markdown, we serialize all of it, and maybe we've extended it now, but then we put it back in HTML? And is this taking more of a in-place editing approach? And do you know if there's any editors that do that, or what are your thoughts on that, Enrique, about doing this in place versus replacing all of it?
I don't understand the in place part.
Yeah, so it's like
technically there are two ways of updating the document, right? I'm sorry to jump in, Paul.
No, you're good. Thanks, Dennis.
I haven't
had coffee today, so you're good.
No, I was thinking about the same thing in relation to editor light, obviously. So technically, there are two ways of updating the document. Either you just convert. Technically, you take, like, in the scenario, you update the Markdown, you pass it to the middleman, in this particular case to prose mirror. It converts it to the HTML, and you dump it as full chunk to the HTML, or the other way around. You take the HTML, dump it fully to prose mirror, and it spits out the whole Markdown document. This is one approach. Another approach is more like sort of like diffing the things. So you have like reactivity in any like modern framework, right? So you do not update the full document, but you update just a tiny bit of the document somehow. So that's technically the question. How does prose mirror does this? Does it convert the whole document, or you can update the document like in chunks, technically, without like technically the performance hit?
Because
if you're
bringing it to the
document.
Yeah, thanks Dennis, and bringing it to the user perspective, I'm a little concerned if we end up having to maintain all of the intricacies of a extension on Markdown or HTML. If we do in place editing, it will just ignore what it doesn't have to change. And so in place editing means that there's traceability between whatever I'm touching and the source of that thing. It's not at the very line level.
So when we are loading the Markdown page in the editor, we want to, since this is a WYSIWYG 18 experience, we want to display the entire content converted. So how, if you see it from that point of view, we have to convert the entire thing. So what would be an alternative to that? If that's a user requirement.
If you start from like HTML and convert to Markdown.
No, we don't start from HTML.
Or no, yeah, you start right. Sorry, you start from the WYSIWYG is HTML. So yeah, that's what I was talking about. If you go back to where you had like the CMS markup.
Where is that?
Actually,
it was out.
I think the answer to this question, Paul, is pretty simple in terms of the burden of deciding how to update the things is still on the middleman, or like on Prosemir in this particular case. It's not something we control from the editor's side. This is the way middleman processes this for us, and then it's just a matter of how we update this, obviously. But if it spits the whole document to us, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make sense for us to update like small bits of the document.
So we are not loading the render content from middleman. The step of loading a Markdown source and displaying it as in the WYSIWYG, that conversion from Markdown to HTML, that is not HTML actually. Prosemir provides a middle layer, a document model that is a better way of structuring content for editing in a WYSIWYG style, but that's another concern. We are not loading the render content from that middleman generates. We are loading the source code, and then we are making all of that transformation in the client to that format.
So it happens. All transformations happen on the client. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you go back to where there's that? I think it was in extend the editor capabilities.
Sure.
Oh no, it's down there, I think. Anyways, the CMS markup where you have 3 lines and you add some YAML property stuff. Ideally, once we load that content or the user has written that content, we never touch that again, because we don't want to know what properties are valid or not. And even that's presentation doesn't even need to know what these metadata is. And so like, if you look at VS Code, when you have like the Markdown editor and the preview side, there's actually traceability between the line generated and the line that generated it. And so I don't know what Prosemir does or what any of this does, but that would be really sweet if we had some sort of editing capability where we could, whatever's rendered keeps that traceability of what was the line that rendered this. So we don't have to know about anything else above it or below it that we might not know about yet. And that's the concern, is if we have to re-implement the GitLab flavor markdown or any other kind of flavor markdown, we don't want to re-implement those. It'd be nice to just, if it's metadata and we don't know how to present it, we just don't present it and we keep it intact. One way of doing that is this in-place traceability editing thing, but I don't know these libraries, so I don't know if that's possible or if I'm just bringing up a conversation topic.
Yeah, so what you mean is that Visual Studio Code provides some sort of source maps, right? Between the render content and the Markdown. But then, what happens? How would you load? Or let's say that you have a content like a mermaid diagram. And you can trace back to that source of the mermaid diagram. You still need to know to be able to generate the mermaid syntax that comes from that snippet. You still need to know you need to know the structure of the mermaid syntax, right? You have to know.
And I think
mermaid.
Right. And I think for presentational stuff, we will. But if something's not presentable, the less we have to know, the better. So I think, and what's nice about that too is if we don't know it, we get some resiliency, and rather than just freaking out and blowing up and erasing things, we just don't present it. So you're right. Yeah, if we're going to present something, we need to know how it's presented. But by default, if we don't know something, we just don't present it. That's, and we don't touch it, even if we don't know about it. That's the biggest concern.
So to understand, Paul, what you're saying is like, if somebody like uses the WYSIWYG editor and they like add a GitLab thing where they add Paul, for example, as a reference, that we just would even in the kind of rendered version just render it like add Paul and not try to kind of like pull in any kind of components. But even if it's like rendered them through middleman, we might be able like to show it, because then it's like replacing it with kind of real reference. Is that what you're trying to get at?
I think that's close. I'm mostly really concerned about like the header YAML for CMS files and that kind of non-presentational metadata. If we have this loop of here's Markdown, it goes to HTML because we have to content editable true it, and then it goes back to Markdown. It's 100% the same file. We have to know how to re-render all of that metadata, which means the presentational bit knows how to somehow save that off. One solution to this is, rather than taking a whole document, transforming the whole document, is whatever changed, we just know how to write it back to that bit. And that's like what VS and Dennis linked this issue. Like, this is how VS Code solves like scrolling between the preview of Markdown and the editing version of Markdown. Is there's that traceability that's there between a line in the source code of Markdown and a line in the rendered HTML. Just something to think about, and there might be other ways that we can work around this using some of these technologies. But you guys have been doing lots of research on all different technologies, but when we were talking about this WYSIWYG, when we were talking about the Markdown preview and editor scrolling sync, I did a little bit of research in this, and seeing this traceability really stuck with me of like, oh, this is how you can have you could solve some of those editing experiences without having to maintain knowing everything about everything that needs to be extensible. If that makes sense. And it sounds like it kind of doesn't.
No, actually, the part that is difficult to understand is how you convert back from the render content that comes, let's say, from the server back to the source file. So there is some knowledge about generating the source content that should be in the editor, right?
Yeah, and there might be other approaches to it. I think the main developer experience or use case we want to take away from it is it'd be really nice if something we didn't know about, we didn't blow up, and we were able to preserve, even if we just kept going back and forth. Like that's the bit that I'd be really concerned about, because keeping track and maintaining all the different syntaxes would definitely be a headache because I can see that growing quite a lot.
I completely agree. Perhaps a good way of addressing that is that those specific syntax that the client doesn't know how to interpret. Let's say, again, in the case of a diagram, maybe we can send a request to render that portion back to the server and just display it. And if we want to have an advanced use case where we can edit that, then we have to actually implement the support for it. So it's like having an MVP where we delegate rendering to a third party. And then once we want to provide a more advanced experience, we have to implement all of the editing tools in the client.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if we could solve the use case of a Markdown with HTML comments in it, and if we can preserve those comments like that. That's the kind of thing I think it would be interesting to see if we can preserve that. Thanks for letting me derail the conversation a little bit. But I think it's definitely a huge win. I don't know a lot about Prosmir, but I know, hey, if to make things extensible, having this middle layer sounds awesome. And thanks for letting me share some thoughts about traceability and inline editing or in-place editing. Cool.
Thank you, Paul. By the way, I don't have the document opened. Is it in the chat? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a bit.
Which document?
The one where we are annotating the questions. I see it in the chat now. The intergroup units.
I started to kind of like start to write down some of the questions. Then the conversation went too fast, and I kind of like removed the last question. And hope that people annotated back because it was hard to follow.
So, is there any other comment or question? I really recommend to explore the Prosmeter guide. There are some links like the proof of concept that I implemented, and I think that is very good to familiarize with the problem that we are solving. That way, we can see how it fits. I know that, for example, we have concerns about having to maintain two editors. Probably a good way of starting a conversation of that is getting familiarized with the use case of the static editor and seeing how we are solving it. Perhaps trying to solve a similar thing with Monaco, perhaps, or something like that. I think it's a way of collecting data that we don't have right now, and it's good to make a decision.
I've heard Monaco, and probably this is my appearance now.
What are your thoughts, Dennis?
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much for this walkthrough. That's really interesting, and gives much better perspective, at least to me, on where does this come from and what problems this is supposed to solve. However, not being accused in promoting the things we already have. So technically, like, jokes aside, I clearly see that the only thing that we don't have at the moment in the editor is the WYSIWYG part. That's the only thing that we don't have, right? We have the Markdown editor. We have the Markdown editor that works with, actually, there was one thing you mentioned, the requirements, like the, no, not in the requirements, but there was something about block editing styles. Like, it totally works in the current editor already. It's like all of the things like GFM, block editing, all this works in our editor now. So the only thing that doesn't exist in the editor now is the WYSIWYG, right? And I don't see any problem of architecting it the way we still maintain just one editor, using editor light or whatever. Like, let's call it Monaco, so that Fran doesn't feel that I'm advocating for anything. So let's call it Monaco. We use Monaco for editing for anything Markdown, and since the extensibility is in the editor you've been talking about now, Editor Lite has the same approach, right? You've been to the deep dive of Editor Lite, and you know that it's purely extensibility that is the selling point of Editor Lite. This tells to me that the WYSIWYG part can easily be the extension of the existing editor, where we just do the things. I've pushed the draft of the merge request where we have the live preview of Markdown at the moment. I don't see any, at the moment, the live preview goes through the server. This is horrible, because this is how we do the Markdown preview at the moment, right? But this doesn't mean that we cannot use Market and Prosemirror Markdown to serve as the middleman and do the things on the client without sending things back and forth to the client. This only tells me that, yes, we can use the core of the existing editor, introduce the missing parts for more client-side oriented manipulations like Market and Prosemirror, and then build this WYSIWYG on top of the existing editor. This architecturally will solve us a lot of headache, because we will still have one source of truth we'll have one editor to maintain. We'll have one editor with the box that we know where, because like up until now, the editor group was up until we completely got rid of A's. When anybody complained that something doesn't work, editing related in the product, the first question we were asking, what editor it is? Like, where do you editing the things? Because we had 3 editors. We had Ace, we had Light, we had WebIDE. Now it's a bit better. Like, at least we have only 2 editors. They do share the same basis, right? Being Monaco. And I would be really I just try to find a reason to introduce one more, like in particular editing basis. Like what are the benefits this editing basis would bring to the product that we do not have? Do you think we have anything that sort of, what is the value of bringing one more editor technically? If let's say, if we can take Market, if we can take Prosemirror Markdown, add them as the extensions again, like speaking of modularity, right? As extensions to Untitled, and then build the WYSIWYG on top of that as well. So what is the benefit of bringing one more editor?
Well, I think that I don't want to answer a question with another question, but I think that the question that we have to answer is, can we implement a WYSIWYG editor on Editor Lite or Monaco?
We can do it. We can do anything. Like Editor Lite is just the editor, right? So technically, this Editor Lite serves in exactly the purpose that you have in the very first demo you showed. When you click Markdown, this is what Editor Lite is, right? The only part that is missing is when you click the Markdown button. That's the part that has to be built. But since the Editor Lite is extensible and we can build the extensions, like live preview that I can link to the demo, a live preview that I built for Editor Lite. It is an extension, and it is being loaded only when you're on the Markdown file, for example. This is the way for us to save bandwidth, to make it really flexible and really simple and really slim. And that's how we can do the WYSIWYG editor as well. Like, we can build it as an extension on top of the Editor Lite, because it's still Markdown. At the basis, it's still Markdown. So that's my main point.
When you say Editor Lite and implementing a WYSIWYG with Editor Lite, are you talking about, could we still use something other than Monaco to do a WYSIWYG? So using Editor Lite as the entry point.
Yeah.
But because knowing a little bit about the way that web WYSIWYGs work, like with content editable, and like it's a wild implementation to get that feel. I would be really surprised if Monaco, which has a very different approach to editing, was able to do it. But maybe they can't. I don't know.
That's the beauty. We do not need to sort of this was the crucial point and pivoting point for me when I was implementing the live preview for Markdown. Like, it should not necessarily be part of the editor itself. It can be, like in the markup, these can be 2 completely different HTML elements. The main thing that should happen is the communication between these 2.
Right.
And here is where we have middleman. We get content from the editor to the middleman to the preview. If instead of preview, we implement the WYSIWYG, we change something in the WYSIWYG, middleman thrown back to the editor, back and forth, back and forth.
But,
It should be part of the editor.
I'm not
itself.
sure to understand that point, Denise.
Okay,
to be honest.
let me,
Like-
yes.
Like middleman is a technology that kind of is like, as far as I understand, like going one way. You throw things in, it knows how to convert it, and then can throw it back out.
Okay, like in this particular case, we will have two middlemen, like one market that converts from Markdown to HTML, if I don't confuse the things, and the prose mirror Markdown, like and not to the HTML, but to this like prose mirror thing, right? And then prose it Markdown converts from this prose whatever back to Markdown. So it is one way. So we use two
don't mean
middlemen.
the technology. You don't mean the technology middleman in this case.
No.
Okay, because that's the confusing part. We have to be careful.
I mean the paradigm of middleman. So something sitting between two parts and doing the conversion for us, and that's like doing it this way allows us to switch this middle part. Let's call it middle part. Switch this middle part, replace it with any middle part we want in the future. We are not sort of coupled to this thing. The same thing about the editor. We can throw it in the future, but we much better, no, don't do that. We can do the same thing with any extension. So that's the beauty of extensibility. But the middleman that is not the product or technology, like this is just the paradigm. The converter can be anything. And that's what I mean. Like, I don't see how bringing new editor to this architecture would benefit us somehow.
So when you say new editor, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about a whole nother GitLab module for a whole nother. It's a whole nother entry point for mounting to an element that can edit stuff.
Sort of. That's what I understood from the presentation. But Enrique can correct me if I'm wrong. But as far as I understand, the editor in this part, the Markdown editor, is different, right?
You're not talking about the specific technologies that Enrique has researched to figure out this is the best way for us to implement. This is the best way for us to implement WYSIWYG editing is using prose mirror or whatever. What I'm kind of getting from you is that could live under editor light because editor light is very modular, and we have just one entry point to here's our editor. Exactly. And I really like that, and I think that's really powerful.
This is the whole point. Like the research that Enrique did is absolutely valuable, and this technically gives us the tools that we have to put on top of editor light in order to deliver the WYSIWYG experience. It's just what my point is that we do not need to bring the new editor in order to achieve this.
So Enrique,
let's give Enrique some time to respond.
Yeah,
please.
I was going to ask Enrique a question. What Dennis has done is with editor light is abstracting a bit of what Monaco does so that we can communicate with this consistent API no matter whether Monaco changes or whatever. What do you think after doing this research? Have you looked at that bit, and do you think that it would make sense to mount this WYSIWYG architecture through editor light's API? Does that make sense, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to have a single entry point. And I think that can simplify the API. What I don't understand, let's say that we load a Markdown file into Monaco, and we display that source file in a render version. That's exactly what a WYSIWYG editor is, right? We just take render something, and then we can edit that render stuff. And that render, editing that render content happens in a content editable element in the browser, basically. So is that having a content editable container, is that something that we can include within Monaco? And if that is true, does that mean that we are just embedding a view that contains all of the process that I explained in the slides?
That's a wonderful question, and this resonates with what Paul was asking. So again, the beauty is that we do not need to implement anything into Editor Lite. The content editable can be a completely separate component. We can lay the editor, not even component, but just completely separate each element. So editor one element. The main thing is that we set up the communication between this. So currently, what it allows us is it notifies us about any changes in the markdown. So whenever you edit the markdown, it notifies any subscriber. So content, we can wrap the content editable into the ES6 module or extension. That's what it's called in the edit line. So we wrap it in the extension that listens to those changes in the editor and communicates the changes to this content editable. The same way when content editable gets updated, we change the text with WYSIWYG part. This extension can communicate the changes to the editor line and hence update the markup as the markdown source. Does it make sense?
So yeah, it makes sense. But well, first, Roman pointed out that we are out of time. So perhaps we have to define some action items to continue the conversation. Right now, I feel that I cannot answer the question of we can implement a WYSIWYG editor within Editor Lite. I implemented a proof of concept that is very simple, that reflects all of the architecture that I'm proposing. Perhaps you can find a way of taking that proof of concept and embedding that within Editor Lite and see if it can work as an extension. So what do you think, Dennis? Could you help with that? Like we can work together and see if we can take all of that process and put it in Editor Lite.
Absolutely, but yes, I totally understand that. Probably it's my responsibility. I do have to give more context, and that's what I have to do rather sooner than later to have another sort of walkthrough Editor Lite, because as I mentioned yesterday, there are a lot of changes there, in particular in the way how the extensions work. So we can have a chat with you only tomorrow, for example, or whenever it fits your schedule, or we can have it like for the broader group, for anybody interested, sometime next week, maybe. I don't know, whatever works for you. So, but we can figure this out, I think. Yeah.
So let's schedule an open meeting, and we can explore the proof of concept, and then perhaps we can maybe do a pairing session and try to embed that WYSIWYG editor within Monaco. Sounds good.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Yeah, so one thing I want to keep everybody in mind, we need to be also like pretty swift with everything that we're building right now. So like there's currently a POC that's working, and if we end up saying, oh, like we could potentially achieve it in Editor Lite, but it's kind of taking us like probably 6 months to get like to on par what we have right now, then we need to strategically make the right decisions, right? I don't want to kind of like I don't want to make kind of like assumptions on anything yet or so. I think we just need to kind of confirm what are the things. Sounding like I totally love Editor Lite. Yeah, don't get me wrong. For me, like just the fake is we need to look also at the use cases where we want to build it right now. In this case, like if we can implement the POC and approve what we have right now, like as a big kind of drawback for our users, then kind of probably makes sense to kind of at least take this step if it's kind of useful. And then as a next step, we kind of say, okay, how can we like merge it? I think it's important to figure out what are the actual WYSIWYG aspects of the current technical solution that we could either kind of reuse for a kind of like extension for Editor Lite. So I don't want us to end up in a solution or in a position so we have to reinvent a lot of things at once, because that will kind of throw us back, right? But that means I will trust like you, Denise, and Enrique, and Paul, feel free to join, or everybody who wants to join or so, to meet with the POC, kind of look at it in more detail, to have like a really solid understanding that we kind of understand the moving parts there. And then we can make the next judgment calls. and define the next steps. Sounds good with everyone?
Absolutely.
Cool. Then thank you, Enrique, for the enlightening and kind of like presenting for everything that you did. That's super exciting. And yeah, I'm already like super excited about all the ideas that kind of people throw around and how kind of like this conversation is shaping up to be. So I think whatever we come up with will be like a really, really great solution.
Yeah,
So
I'm very excited. This looks like, it feels like a great start for our collaboration with the team. This has been very good. So thank you, everyone.
I'm so excited to be working with you closer, Enrique. I'm happy that you're on the team. And thanks again for sharing everything.
I genuinely feel the same, Paul. You can't imagine.
Enrique is like, I was hoping we could be further away from each other. I'm joking. I'm sorry. Anyways, thanks everybody.
We'll get
Bye.
used to this, Enrique. That's the level of jokes we